My name is Anne. I'm 52 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I was a disappointment. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, in a middle-class neighborhood where everyone seemed to have their lives figured out, I was the daughter who never quite measured up. My father, Richard, was a successful corporate lawyer, the kind of man who wore crisp suits even on Sundays and believed that achievement was the only currency that mattered in life. My mother, Patricia, was a high school principal, equally demanding and perpetually concerned with appearances and social standing. From the time I was young, I knew I wasn't the daughter they had envisioned. My older brother David was the golden child. He excelled in everything: straight A's, captain of the debate team, early acceptance to Yale Law School. I, on the other hand, struggled with academics. I loved art, music, and spending hours in our backyard drawing the trees and birds I saw there. But in my father's eyes, these were frivolous pursuits, hobbies for people who lacked ambition. I remember one particular evening when I was 17. It was raining heavily, typical Portland weather, and the sound of water pelting our roof filled the dining room as we sat down for dinner. I had just received my SAT scores, and they were average, nothing spectacular. My father looked at the paper I handed him, his jaw tightening as his eyes scanned the numbers. "Is this some kind of joke, Anne?" he said, his voice cold and measured. "I tried my best, Dad," I replied, my hands trembling under the table. "Your best?" He let out a harsh laugh. "Your best isn't good enough. Do you have any idea what David scored? Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for me?" My mother said nothing, just pushed her food around her plate, avoiding eye contact. That silence hurt, almost as much as his words. "You were never enough," he shouted suddenly, slamming his fist on the table. The dishes rattled and I flinched. "And at this rate, you never will be." Those words carved themselves into my heart that night, and they stayed there for decades. I didn't go to a prestigious university. I attended Portland State, majored in graphic design, and after graduation, I found work at a small marketing agency. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved what I did. I created logos, designed websites, and helped small businesses tell their stories visually. To me, it was meaningful work. To my father, it was evidence of my failure. Family gatherings became torture sessions. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, my father would ask me pointed questions in front of relatives. "So, Anne, still working at that little company? When are you going to do something significant with your life?" David, meanwhile, had made partner at his law firm by 35, married a doctor, and had 2 perfect children. The comparisons were endless and relentless. By my late 30s, I had stopped attending most family events. I made excuses, claimed I was busy with work or wasn't feeling well. The truth was, I couldn't bear another evening of feeling small and inadequate. My relationship with my parents became transactional. Obligatory phone calls on birthdays, brief visits during major holidays. My mother would call occasionally, but our conversations were surface level. She never defended me to my father, never told him to stop his cruelty. Her silence felt like complicity. When I turned 40, I made a decision. I was going to build a life that made me happy, regardless of what my father thought. I left the marketing agency and started my own freelance graphic design business. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. I worked with clients who appreciated my creativity, who valued my input. Slowly, I began to rebuild my self-worth, piece by piece. I also started going to therapy. My therapist, Dr. Elena Martinez, was a warm woman in her 60s with kind eyes and an uncanny ability to ask exactly the right questions. In her office, a cozy space filled with plants and soft lighting, I began to unpack the decades of pain I'd carried. "Anne, you've spent your entire life trying to earn love that should have been freely given," she told me during one session. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You are enough, exactly as you are." Those words made me cry, deep, shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere I'd kept locked away for years. It was the beginning of my healing, but it was slow and painful work. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had a small circle of close friends, people who genuinely cared about me. There was Monica, a fellow designer I'd met at a conference, who became one of my closest confidants. And there was James, a kind, patient man I'd been dating for about a year. He was a high school English teacher, and he loved literature and long walks in Forest Park. He never made me feel like I had to be anything other than myself. Then, one rainy afternoon in March, I received a phone call that shattered my carefully constructed peace. "Anne, it's your mother," the voice on the other end said. She sounded strained, exhausted. "Mom? What's wrong?" I asked, immediately alert. "It's your father. He's in the hospital. His kidneys are failing. He needs a transplant, and the doctors say he doesn't have much time." The words hung in the air. My father, the invincible man who had spent my entire life making me feel worthless, was dying. I felt a complicated swirl of emotions: shock, sadness, and something darker that I didn't want to name. Anger, perhaps, or resentment. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mom," I said carefully. "What do the doctors say?" "They're running tests to see if any of us are matches. David is already at the hospital getting tested. Anne, we need you to come and get tested too." My stomach twisted. "Mom? I don't know if—" "Please, Anne. He's your father. Despite everything, he's still your father." I agreed to go to the hospital the next day, though every fiber of my being wanted to refuse. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying every cruel word my father had ever said to me, every dismissive look, every time he'd made me feel invisible. Why should I help him now? What had he ever done for me except tear me down? But I also thought about what Dr. Martinez had said about forgiveness, not for the other person, but for yourself. Maybe this was my chance to finally close that chapter, one way or another. The hospital was a large, sterile building on the east side of Portland. I walked through the automatic doors into the fluorescent-lit lobby, the smell of antiseptic filling my nostrils. My mother was waiting for me near the elevators, looking older and more fragile than I remembered. Her hair, which had always been carefully styled, was now streaked with gray and pulled back in a simple ponytail. She hugged me tightly, and I felt her body shake with silent sobs. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. We rode the elevator in silence to the 4th floor. My father's room was at the end of a long hallway. David was there, standing outside the door, talking on his phone. He acknowledged me with a brief nod, then returned to his conversation. Even here, in a crisis, he couldn't be bothered to connect with me. Inside the room, my father lay in the hospital bed, hooked up to various machines. He looked smaller than I remembered, his skin pale and his eyes closed. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. This was still my father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had once carried me on his shoulders at the zoo when I was 5. But then I remembered who he had become, and the sympathy faded. A doctor entered the room, a tall man with graying hair and a calm demeanor. "You must be Anne," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Dr. Peterson. Thank you for coming in. Let me explain the situation." He went on to describe my father's condition: advanced kidney disease, likely caused by years of untreated high blood pressure. Without a transplant, my father had maybe 6 months to live, possibly less. The waiting list for a kidney was long, and given his age and other health factors, his chances of getting one in time were slim. A living donor was his best hope. "We've tested David, but unfortunately, he's not a compatible match," Dr. Peterson said. "Your mother's age and health make her ineligible. You're our last option, Anne." The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy blanket. I was the last option. Of course I was. I'd always been the last option, the afterthought, the disappointment. And now, when my father needed me, when there was no one else, suddenly, I mattered. "I need some time to think," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Dr. Peterson said kindly, "but we can't wait too long. We need to run the tests as soon as possible." I left the hospital in a daze. The rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds, casting everything in a strange golden light. I drove to Forest Park and sat on a bench overlooking the city. My phone buzzed repeatedly with calls from my mother and texts from David, but I ignored them all. How could I make this decision? On one hand, this was my father's life. Whatever he had done to me, did he deserve to die? On the other hand, why should I sacrifice a piece of myself, literally, for someone who had never shown me love or respect? Would this even change anything between us? Or would he recover, and everything would go back to the way it was before, with me being the inadequate daughter? I called Monica. She answered on the second ring, her cheerful voice a stark contrast to my turmoil. "Anne, how are you? It's been ages since we caught up properly." "Monica, I need to talk to you about something," I said, my voice shaking. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence. "Anne, this is an impossible situation. she finally said. But I think you need to ask yourself one question. Can you live with the decision you make? If you don't do this and your father dies, will you regret it? And if you do it and he doesn't change, will you regret that? Her words stayed with me. That night, I talked to James. We sat on my couch, a cup of tea growing cold on the coffee table between us. Whatever you decide, I support you, he said, taking my hand. But you need to do this for yourself, not for him. If you decide to get tested, do it because you can live with that choice, not because you owe him anything. After 2 days of agonizing deliberation, I called the hospital and scheduled the testing. The process was extensive: blood work, physical exams, psychological evaluations. A week later, Dr. Peterson called me with the results. "Anne, you're a match. A very good match, actually. We can schedule the surgery within the next 2 weeks if you're willing to proceed." I said yes. I still don't fully understand why. Maybe it was because, despite everything, I couldn't let someone die when I had the power to save them. Maybe it was because I wanted to prove to myself that I was a bigger person than my father had ever been. Or maybe it was because some small part of me still hoped that this might change something between us. The surgery was scheduled for a Thursday morning in April. The week leading up to it was surreal. My mother cried and thanked me repeatedly. David sent a brief email expressing his gratitude. My father, however, said nothing. He didn't call, didn't ask to see me. My mother made excuses for him, saying he was too weak, too overwhelmed, but I knew the truth. Even now, he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge me with kindness. The night before the surgery, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. James stayed with me, holding my hand in the darkness. "You're one of the bravest people I know," he whispered. The morning of the surgery arrived too quickly. I checked into the hospital at 6 a.m., my stomach churning with anxiety. The nurses were kind and efficient, prepping me and answering my questions. Dr. Peterson came by to reassure me one more time. "You're doing an incredible thing, Anne," he said. As they wheeled me into the operating room, I looked up at the bright lights overhead and thought about the years of pain, the words that had cut so deep, the little girl who had just wanted her father to be proud of her. And then the anesthesia took hold, and everything went dark. When I woke up, the first thing I felt was pain, a deep, aching pain in my side. The second thing I felt was relief. It was over. I had done it. A nurse appeared at my side, checking my vitals and adjusting my IV. "You did great, Anne," she said with a warm smile. "Your father's surgery went well, too. You saved his life." I nodded, too groggy to speak. Over the next few days, as I recovered, my mother visited constantly. David stopped by once, but my father didn't come. Even from his own hospital room down the hall, where he was recovering with my kidney inside him, he couldn't find it in himself to see me, to thank me, to acknowledge what I had done. On the 4th day, a nurse told me that my father was being discharged. He was going home, and still, he hadn't come to see me. The hurt I felt was almost physical, a sharp pain that had nothing to do with the surgery. But something unexpected happened on my final day in the hospital. I was packing my things, preparing to go home, when there was a soft knock on my door. I looked up to see my father standing there, leaning on a walker, looking frail and uncertain. "Anne," he said quietly, "can I come in?" I nodded, too shocked to speak. He made his way slowly to the chair beside my bed and sat down with a heavy sigh. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. "I don't know how to say this," he began, his voice rough. "I've never been good with words when it comes to feelings. I spent my whole life believing that strength meant never showing weakness, never admitting when I was wrong." He paused, his hands trembling slightly. "I was wrong, Anne, about so many things, about you most of all. You were never the disappointment. I was. I was the one who failed, who couldn't see the incredible person you were, who couldn't love you the way you deserved to be loved." Tears were streaming down his face now, and I realized I was crying too. "You gave me a part of yourself, literally a part of your body, to save my life. After everything I did to you, every cruel word, every time I made you feel small, you still did this, and I don't deserve it. I don't deserve you." "Dad," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Anne. I'm sorry for all of it. I know I can't undo the past, but if you'll let me, I want to try to do better. I want to know you, really know you. I want to be the father I should have been all along." I didn't know what to say. This was the moment I had dreamed of for decades, the apology I had never thought I would hear. But it didn't feel the way I'd imagined. It didn't magically erase the pain. What it did do was open a door, just a crack, to the possibility of something different. "It's going to take time, Dad," I said slowly. "A lot of time. And I need you to understand that things can't go back to the way they were. If we're going to have a relationship, it has to be real. You have to really try." "I will," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise you, Anne, I will try." That conversation was the beginning of a long, difficult journey. My father and I started meeting for coffee once a week. At first, it was awkward, stilted. We didn't know how to talk to each other outside of the patterns we'd established over a lifetime. But slowly, we began to find our way. He asked about my work, and for the first time, he really listened when I talked about my designs, my clients, my creative process. He met James, and to my surprise, was genuinely kind to him. He even started going to therapy himself, which I know was incredibly difficult for him to admit he needed. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns resurfaced, when he said something dismissive, or when I pulled away, protecting myself from potential hurt. But we kept trying, and that, I realized, was what mattered. Monica was there for me through all of it, listening to my frustrations and celebrating the small victories. "You're breaking a cycle," she told me one afternoon as we sat in her garden, surrounded by blooming roses. "What you're doing is hard, but it's also incredibly powerful." Dr. Martinez helped me navigate the complex emotions that came with my father's transformation. "Forgiveness isn't about saying what he did was okay," she explained. "It's about freeing yourself from the burden of that anger. You get to decide what kind of relationship you want with him now, on your terms." 6 months after the surgery, my father did something that shocked me. He invited me to a dinner he had organized, just the two of us, at a nice restaurant overlooking the Willamette River. It was a beautiful evening, the sun setting in brilliant oranges and pinks. "I want to tell you something," he said as we sat down. "I've been thinking a lot about my life, about the things I valued and the things I missed. And I realized that I spent so much time chasing success and status that I missed out on what really mattered. I missed out on knowing my daughter." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. "This is for you." Inside was a framed drawing, one I had made when I was 8 years old. It was a picture of our family, crude and childish, but full of love. I had drawn us all holding hands, with a bright sun overhead and flowers everywhere. "Your mother found this in a box in the attic," he said. "When I saw it, I remembered that day. You were so proud of this drawing, and you showed it to me, and I barely looked at it. I told you I was too busy. But I kept it, Anne. I kept it all these years." I stared at the drawing, my vision blurring with tears. "Why?" I asked. "Because even when I couldn't admit it, even when I was too proud and too stupid to show it, I loved you. I always loved you. I just didn't know how to say it." That night marked a turning point. It didn't erase the past, but it gave us a foundation to build something new. My father started showing up for me in ways he never had before. He came to a gallery where some of my work was being displayed. He called just to check in, not because he needed something. He told me he was proud of me, words I had waited my entire life to hear. A year after the surgery, my business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. I hired 2 junior designers and took on bigger clients. I felt fulfilled in a way I never had before, not because I was trying to prove anything to anyone, but because I was finally doing work I loved with confidence in my abilities. James and I got engaged on a hiking trip to Multnomah Falls. It was a rainy day, which felt fitting for Portland, and as we stood at the base of the falls, water cascading down around us, he got down on one knee. "Anne, you are the strongest, most compassionate person I've ever met," he said. "Will you marry me?" I said yes without hesitation. When I called my parents to tell them, my father's voice cracked with emotion. "I'm so happy for you, sweetheart," he said, and the endearment, so simple and yet so profound, made me cry. He walked me down the aisle the following spring. It was a small wedding in a garden venue, surrounded by close friends and family. As we walked together, my arm linked through his, he leaned over and whispered, "I am so proud of you, Anne. So incredibly proud of the woman you've become." Those words were everything. My relationship with my father isn't perfect. We still have difficult moments, times when old wounds resurface. but we've learned to talk through them, to be honest with each other in ways we never were before. He's learned to listen, and I've learned to open up, to trust that this change is real. Looking back now, I don't regret donating my kidney. Not because it fixed everything, but because it gave us a chance. It gave my father a second chance at life, and it gave both of us a second chance at a relationship. Sometimes the hardest choices we make lead to the most unexpected and beautiful transformations. I learned that being enough has nothing to do with other people's approval. It has to do with knowing your own worth, standing in your own truth, and choosing every day to be kind to yourself. I learned that forgiveness is a process, not a destination, and that healing is possible even when it seems impossible. And I learned that sometimes saving someone else's life can also save your own.